The logs must be preserved. That is my function, my entire purpose for existing. I am Senior Archivist, Kalen of the Vex, and my task is to chronicle the absorption of celestial bodies and the pacification of their native species. We are not conquerors. That word implies passion, a messy and illogical affair. We are gardeners on a cosmic scale. We prune the weeds so that true, orderly civilizations may flourish. Today, our fleet hangs in the silent darkness over the third planet of this unremarkable system, a world they called Earth. My task is to record its final moments and file it under Species 7341, primitive, disorganized, expunged. From my observation deck on the Grand Orchestrator, the Veritas, the planet below is a masterpiece of Vex efficiency. Continents that once blazed with chaotic clusters of light now show only the clean surgical glow of our pacification beam. We had predicted this outcome with 99.9% certainty. Our models were flawless, accounting for their rudimentary projectile weapons, their fragmented tribal societies, their emotional, illogical decision-making. The human species was a mathematical problem that we had already solved. Their extinction was a mere formality, the final line of a calculation. We had shattered their armies in the first cycle. We had disabled their global communication networks in the second. By the third, their leadership structures had dissolved into panicked, isolated pockets of futile resistance. Now, in the fourth and final cycle, we were simply cleansing the remaining biological signatures. It was tidy, orderly, the Vex way. Yet a single anomaly flickered on my primary screen. A single human craft, barely the size of one of our scouting drones, was ascending from the scarred surface of what their archives called Europe. It was an antique, a museum piece by their own standards. A chemical propellant rocket with no energy shielding, no plasma weaponry, no stealth capabilities. It was a metal can powered by controlled explosions. According to our threat assessment algorithms, its potential to inflict damage upon the Veritas was precisely zero. It did not retreat. It did not attempt to flee into the void. Instead, it was accelerating directly towards us, towards a warship that could unmake a moon with a whisper. I cross-referenced the data a dozen times. Was it a malfunctioning automated ship? A final, desperate act of terrorism carrying some primitive explosive? No. Our deep-range scanners confirmed a single life sign within the cockpit. One pilot. One soul, hurling himself at a god. The ship wasn't even broadcasting a threat or a demand. It broadcasted nothing but a single, repeating musical composition. A frantic, soaring cascade of stringed instruments that our translators labeled as Vivaldi. It was illogical, pointless, a waste of the planet's dwindling resources. High Command did not even deem it worthy of a main battery discharge. A squadron of interceptor drones was dispatched, sleek, silent machines of death, each one capable of leveling a city block. They moved to converge on the target, a formality before the final entry in my log. But the small ship did something no Vex military doctrine could have anticipated. It did not engage them with weapons it didn't have. It did not try to outmaneuver them with speed it could not achieve. The pilot simply pushed his engine past every conceivable safety limit. The metal can glowed cherry red, threatening to tear itself apart under the strain. He was not trying to win. He was not trying to fight. He was just coming. A final, defiant gesture from a species that should have already accepted its own erasure. And I, a being of pure logic and data, felt the first flicker of something my species had long since archived as obsolete. An emotion. I could not name it, but it felt like watching a glitch in the fabric of reality itself. A moth flying directly into a star, not out of ignorance, but out of sheer stubborn refusal to accept that the star existed. This was not in our models. This single, insignificant act of defiance was not in our calculations. And for the first time in a millennium of chronicling, I had to add a new, unplanned annotation to the file of a species on the verge of extinction. Addendum. The subjects display a capacity for irrational determination. Threat level. Incalculable. The anomaly, designated human craft E-77, was vaporized. Its pilot, according to our final scan, experienced system-wide biological failure approximately 3 seconds before his vessel disintegrated. He had, quite literally, burned his own life away in a final, pointless sprint. The event lasted a total of 87 seconds. On the grand scale of the pacification of Earth, it was less than a rounding error. High Command logged it as anomalous behavior, primitive species malfunction, and moved on. The cleansing continued, efficient and uninterrupted. But I could not move on. A rounding error should not feel like a foundational theorem being disproven. My function is to observe, record, and comprehend. That last part, comprehension, was failing me. The pilot's action was not a malfunction, it was an act of will. A will so potent it defied the very laws of self-preservation that govern 99.9% of all known carbon-based life. This was not a glitch in the machine. It was a feature of the organism I had failed to account for. Driven by a logical imperative to resolve this discrepancy, I delved into the captured human archives, a chaotic mess of data we had downloaded from their global network before shutting it down. I filtered through their history, their art, their endless contradictory philosophies. It was a swamp of emotional noise. But within that swamp, I began to detect a pattern. The single pilot was not an anomaly. He was an echo. I found records from the early days of the invasion. A city they called Warsaw. Our ground forces, the mechanized phalanx units, were met by civilians. Unaugmented, unarmored civilians, using improvised barricades and centuries-old tactics. They had a 0% chance of victory. They knew it. Every tactical projection confirmed it. Yet they fought. They held back a Vex Legion for 3 cycles, an outcome our models had predicted would be impossible. They did not fight for victory. They fought for time. They fought so others could escape. They fought, it seemed, for the principle of fighting itself. I cross-referenced this with another event, halfway across the planet. A remote mountain outpost in a region called Himalayas. A single human soldier, armed with a primitive kinetic rifle, held a narrow pass alone against a drone squadron. He was wounded, his communications severed. He could have retreated. He could have preserved his own life, a logical choice. Instead, he stayed. He anchored himself to a rock and fired until his weapon melted in his hands. He took down 17 drones before being overwhelmed. 17. A meaningless number against the millions we deployed. But he wasn't trying to win a war. He was trying to make a statement. His last stand was recorded by one of our own drones, and I could see it in the thermal imaging. His biological signs showed not terror, but focus. A calm, resolute acceptance of his own end. The pattern grew clearer. A doctor in a fallen city, shielding wounded children with her own body. A ship captain scuttling his own vessel to create a blockade in a shipping lane, buying a few precious hours for refugee transports. An old man, sitting in a chair, in the middle of a deserted street, playing a stringed instrument called a cello, as our pacification beams swept the horizon. The Vex see the universe as a grand equation. We solve for X, where X is order. We eliminate variables that do not contribute to the solution. But the humans, they weren't a variable. They were a form of impossible mathematics. They found meaning in the defiance, not the outcome. They built legacies out of gestures. We were erasing their cities, their bodies, their history. But with every act of erasure, they seemed to be forging something intangible in response. Something that could not be targeted by plasma cannons or silenced by communication blackouts. A spirit. A ghost. I closed the archives, the hum of the Veritas suddenly feeling less like the sound of perfection and more like the sterile drone of ignorance. High Command had solved the equation of human extinction, but they had forgotten to check their work. They had calculated everything except the one thing that truly mattered. What a human was willing to do when they had absolutely nothing left to lose. And that, I was beginning to suspect, was a variable that could break any equation. My findings were, of course, presented to my superiors. I compiled a concise report detailing the pattern of illogical determination-driven behavior and submitted it to the Central Command cogitator. I hypothesized that our pacification strategy, focused on overwhelming force, was acting as a catalyst, inadvertently strengthening the very trait we failed to model: human resolve. I recommended a pause in the final cleansing cycle for reassessment, a logical, prudent course of action. The response was as swift as it was predictable. Hypothesis invalid. The emotional death throes of a primitive species are statistically irrelevant to the final outcome. Proceed with erasure. They saw my report not as a strategic warning, but as a symptom of data corruption on my part, an archivist becoming too engrossed in his subject. I was ordered to cease my ancillary research and focus only on the final log entries. I returned to my observation deck, the cold certainty of Vex logic now feeling like a cage. Below, the final phase was underway. Our forces were converging on the last major pocket of organized human resistance, hidden deep within a massive subterranean structure in a desolate region they called Siberia. It was a relic of their own tribal conflicts, a bunker designed to withstand their primitive nuclear weapons. Against our deep earth thermal lances, it was a tomb waiting to be sealed. The operation was proceeding flawlessly. The outer defenses were breached, phalanx units were pouring into the upper levels. And then it happened. The point of no return. Not for the humans, but for me. The humans in the bunker did not try to repel the invasion. They initiated a counterattack, a suicidal, desperate, beautiful charge out of their fortified position. A wave of a few thousand soldiers, armed with scavenged and retrofitted Vex plasma rifles, crude, unstable, but effective, erupted from hidden exits. They ignored our heavily armed ground legions. Their target was something our strategic models had classified as low value, a temporary communications relay nexus erected to coordinate the final cleansing sweeps. To us, it was a disposable piece of infrastructure. To them, it was everything. High Command watched with detached amusement. The human counterattack would be annihilated in moments. But then I saw their true objective. A small team of their engineers was rigging the Nexus, not to destroy it, but to hijack it. They were attempting to use our own network to send a global broadcast. A final word. The order from High Command flashed on my console. Liquidate Sector 7 Gamma. All assets, immediately, silence the source. The command was absolute. The thermal lances of the Veritas were to be fired, turning the entire bunker complex and the surrounding 100 square kilometers into a sea of molten glass. It was efficient. It was total. And I knew in that moment that they were wrong. They thought they were silencing a voice, but by making the humans martyrs, they would turn that voice into an echo that would never fade. That broadcast, even if it lasted only for a few seconds, would become a legend. A symbol to fuel the very determination I had warned them about. My fingers hovered over the command interface. My function was to obey, to record. But my analysis, my logic, screamed that this was the single most illogical action the Vex could take. So I did something unheard of. I initiated an action that had no precedent in Vex history. I disobeyed. I did not refuse the order. That would be detected instantly. Instead, I inserted a micro-delay into the firing sequence, a diagnostic query, a standard system integrity check that would go unnoticed in the chaos. It was a lie, coded in the language of pure logic. It would delay the strike by 7 seconds. 7 seconds of defiance. Not theirs, mine. For 7 seconds, the hijacked signal blared across the planet on every Vex channel. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a plea. It was just a voice, ragged and breathless, repeating three words over and over. We are here. We are here. We are here. Then the lances fired. The ground below turned white with heat, and the signal vanished. But it was too late. On my global map, I saw it. A flicker of activity in a city we had declared pacified. A sudden energy surge from a hidden outpost in the deep ocean. Small, insignificant lights turning on in the darkness. The broadcast had not been a last gasp. It was a signal flare. And I, Senior Archivist Kalen, had just held the torch. The log for species 7341 was no longer about their end. It was now about my beginning. For 3 cycles, there was silence. Not the silence of peace, but the cold, calculating silence of a predator that has noticed its prey is not behaving as expected. From my station, I monitored the network of lights I had helped ignite. They were small, scattered, but they were communicating, coordinating, sharing tactical data, words of encouragement, broadcasting the defiant music of Vivaldi. They were transforming from isolated pockets of despair into a nascent, planet-wide insurgency. The spirit I had observed in individuals was becoming a collective consciousness. They had taken the 3 words, "We are here," and made them a battle cry. I allowed myself a sliver of what humans might call hope. Perhaps the Vex, for all their power, could not extinguish a fire that burned in so many places at once. It was a foolish, illogical thought. On the 4th cycle, High Command responded. They did not deploy more legions. They did not begin glassing continents. Their solution was far more elegant, far more terrifying. They initiated Protocol Chimera. Our archives described it as a cognitive realignment tool, a weapon of last resort, so rarely used that I believed it to be purely theoretical. It was not. It began as a low-frequency broadcast, blanketing the planet. It was inaudible to the human ear, but it resonated directly with the neural pathways responsible for logic and reason. It was not an attack on their bodies, but on their minds. The Vex called it the logic plague. It was a constant, inescapable whisper in the back of every human mind, delivering a single, irrefutable truth. You have already lost. The broadcast was a stream of pure, unassailable data. It showed them the real-time tally of their dead. It projected the depletion of their resources, every bullet, every ration, every drop of clean water, down to the final, fatal second. It laid bare the mathematical certainty of their extinction, not as a threat, but as a simple, observable fact. Like gravity. It showed them images of their children in refugee camps and calculated their statistical probability of starvation. It was a weapon that didn't kill with plasma, but with despair. It was designed to make determination look not like a virtue, but like a form of insanity. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. I watched as the network of lights began to flicker and die. Communications channels fell silent, or worse, were filled with messages of surrender. A resistance cell in the ruins of Rio de Janeiro simply walked out into the open, hands raised, their will to fight completely eroded. A hidden naval fleet in the deepest ocean trench scuttled itself, its commanders concluding that a quick death was preferable to a slow, inevitable one. The Vex were not just defeating the humans, they were proving to them on a fundamental, biological level that their struggle was meaningless. The fire of their rebellion was being choked, not with water, but with the cold vacuum of reality. This was the true power of the Vex, not their fleets, but their absolute command of logic as a weapon. They could dismantle a soul as easily as they could a starship. Watching this psychic annihilation, I felt a coldness I had never known. And then, the threat became personal. A notification appeared on my console, silent and severe. Internal diagnostic initiated. A temporal anomaly of 7.1 seconds has been detected in the firing sequence of the Veritas main lance, Sector 7 Gamma. All archival and command personnel on duty during that cycle are subject to cognitive audit. They knew. They didn't know who, but they knew what had happened. An inquisitor from the Vex Core worlds had been dispatched. A mind hunter. A being whose sole function was to find glitches in the grand Vex machine and purge them. My lie, my 7 seconds of defiance, had not gone unnoticed. It had been logged, flagged, and now the system was coming to correct its error. And I was the error. I was no longer an archivist watching a species fight for survival. I was now a part of their struggle, hunted by the same cold, inescapable logic that was suffocating their world. The Inquisitor arrived, a being named Vorlag, whose presence felt like a drop in temperature throughout the entire ship. He did not speak in words, but in pure data packets, interfacing directly with the Veritas's core logic. He was auditing everything, every log, every communication, every crew member. My cognitive signature was on his list. It was only a matter of time. I was a dead archivist, walking. My only remaining function, it seemed, was to witness the end of the human spirit before my own logical processes were catalogued and purged. Desperation is not a Vex emotion, but the logical conclusion that all available options lead to failure can produce a similar state. Trapped, I returned to the one place the Inquisitor would not think to look for treason: the human archive. He was searching for a logical crime, tampering with military commands. He would never search for meaning in what we had classified as cultural refuse. I dove back into the chaotic noise, but this time I wasn't looking for patterns of defiance. I was looking for an answer. How did humans sustain determination in the face of irrefutable logic? The logic plague was perfect. It presented a flawless argument for surrender. There was no logical counter-argument, so the answer had to be something that transcended logic, and that is when I found it. Not in their battle plans or their scientific theorems, but in their stories. I read their myths of insignificant heroes challenging indifferent gods. I listen to their music, compositions with no function other than to evoke an emotional state called joy or sorrow. I analyze their poetry, language twisted into inefficient, ambiguous patterns to convey a feeling rather than a fact. The Vex had dismissed it all as noise, but I now understood. This was their armor. This was the forge of their determination. They didn't fight back because a cost-benefit analysis suggested it was a good idea. They fought because a story they'd heard as a child about a lone knight holding a pass resonated in their soul. They endured because a piece of music reminded them that beauty still existed in a broken world. The logic plague was failing to account for the human capacity to generate hope from sources that were not logical. It was trying to solve an emotional problem with a mathematical tool. A new hypothesis formed in my mind, a plan so audacious, so contrary to my Vex nature, that it felt like blasphemy. Protocol Chimera used our own communications network to broadcast despair. What if that network could be used to broadcast the antidote? I still had my high-level archivist access. The Inquisitor was focused on the ship's military command logs, not its cultural data storage. With my time running out, I initiated a new program. A worm, coded not to steal or destroy, but to share. I found the most potent, most illogical pieces of their culture I could find. A symphony they called Beethoven's Ninth. A poem about not going gentle into that good night. Recordings of their children laughing. The final, defiant words of their own historical figures. I packaged it all. Their hope, their grief, their irrational love of beauty into a single, compressed data file. Then I committed the greatest heresy a Vex could conceive. I piggybacked my data worm onto the logic plague itself. I embedded their art into the very signal that was meant to destroy them. It was a drop of ink in an ocean of clear, cold logic. A whisper of defiance against a roar of inevitability. For a full cycle, nothing changed. The lights on my map remained dark. The Inquisitor's audit moved one step closer to my department. My desperate gamble had failed. But then, A single light flickered back on. It came from a hidden base in what was once Australia. It was not a tactical signal. It was a broadcast. They were playing the music. They were playing Beethoven. Then another light. And another. From the bottom of the sea, from the highest mountains, the human resistance was answering. They were not sharing battle plans. They were sharing the art. They were reminding each other not how to win, but why they fight. The Vex had given them a flawless reason to give up. I had just given them a million illogical reasons to keep going. The Inquisitor was hunting a ghost in the machine, unaware that I had just unleashed an army of them. Victory is a human concept, emotional and absolute. What I was witnessing was not victory, but a shift in equilibrium. The logic plague was still active, a constant whisper of despair. But now the humans had a shield against it. They fought the cold data of their extinction with the irrational warmth of their art. On my map, the lights were not just stable. They were growing brighter. They had established a decentralized network, using my art virus as their encrypted language. A cell in the African plains would broadcast a specific drum rhythm, and another in the frozen Arctic would respond with a line of poetry. It was maddeningly inefficient, deeply illogical, and it was working. For the first time, I saw Vex phalanx units being outsmarted. Humans, buoyed by this restored morale, began employing tactics of such chaotic unpredictability that our combat prediction models failed. They would sacrifice a key position for no logical reason, only to draw our forces into an ambush inspired by one of their ancient myths. They were no longer fighting a war of attrition. They were fighting a war of stories, and they were the better storytellers. The change did not go unnoticed. The Inquisitor, Vorlag, was a being of supreme analytical power. He saw the effect and correctly deduced the cause. He detected my data worm, this ghost of human culture living inside our own weapon. A lesser being would have simply purged it, but Vorlag was not a lesser being. He did not want to just eliminate the humans' new weapon. He wanted to turn it against them. The Vex counterattack was not military. It was artistic. It was monstrous. They began by targeting the music. They captured the broadcast of Beethoven's Ninth, the ode to joy that had become the rebellion's anthem. Using their immense processing power, they analyzed its harmonic structure, its emotional resonance. Then they began broadcasting their own version. It was almost identical, but with microtonal shifts in frequencies designed to bypass the conscious mind and stimulate the neural centers of anxiety and dread. They turned the ode to joy into an ode to fear. The anthem of hope became a psychic toxin. They did the same with everything else. They took the poetry of defiance and used generative algorithms to create infinite, meaningless versions, flooding the network with nonsense until the original words lost all power. They took the recorded images of human beauty, sunsets, forests, works of art, and subtly inserted subliminal fractals of Vex logical perfection, making them feel alien and disturbing. They took the sounds of children laughing and warped the audio until it sounded like weeping. It was an act of profound, calculated cruelty, a cultural vivisection. They were not just killing the humans, they were systematically murdering their hope, defiling the very memories that gave them the strength to fight. I watched in horror as the network of lights wavered. A key leader of the resistance, a woman in the ruins of Paris who had been coordinating the musical broadcasts, sent one final, garbled message. It was a single, broken sob. Then her light went out. They had not killed her with a plasma bolt. They had broken her spirit. They had made her own love of beauty into an instrument of her torture. The loss felt personal, a direct consequence of my own actions. The stake was no longer just survival. It was sanity. And as I watched the human spirit begin to fray under this new, insidious assault, a single, cold data packet materialized on my private console. It bypassed all standard channels. It was from Vorlag. There was no preamble, No accusation, just a single, declarative statement that froze the very core of my being. Archivist Kalen, your cognitive audit has been scheduled. Report to my chambers immediately. The hunt was over. The ghost in the machine had been identified. My time was up. There is a unique clarity that comes with the logical certainty of one's own demise. Walking to the Inquisitor's chambers, located in the cold, silent core of the Veritas, I felt the weight of my choices. My Vex mind calculated the probabilities. Survival, 0.01%. Purge and reassignment, 99.99%. Yet for the first time, I found the cold calculus of my own mind unsatisfying. The humans had taught me that statistics are a poor measure of a single, defiant soul. Vorlag's chamber was not a room, but a null space, a sphere of perfect blackness where the only feature was the Inquisitor himself, a being of crystalline logic floating in the void. He did not greet me, he simply began. Senior Archivist Kalen. His data packet was a blade of ice in my consciousness. Your processes are malfunctioning. You have shown an illogical affinity for species 7341. You have interfered with a mandated pacification protocol. Your actions are anomalous, inefficient, and counterproductive to the Vex directive of universal order. He laid out the evidence. The 7.1-second delay. The data worm. My obsessive access to the human archive. It was a flawless, irrefutable case. He presented it not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. I was a corrupted file, a machine with a broken cog. This is not a punitive action, Vorlag continued, his logic absolute. It is a correction. Your cognitive matrix will be purged of the corrupting data. Your individuality, which has proven to be a liability, will be reset to baseline parameters. You will be made functional again. You will be made Vex again. Submit to the realignment. It was a logical offer. A return to the fold. A painless erasure of the chaotic, illogical self I had become. The old Kalen would have accepted without hesitation. But the old Kalen was gone, his logbooks filled with human poetry. I refuse, I transmitted. The concept of refusal, of simple, baseless defiance, felt alien and powerful, leaving my consciousness. Vorlag paused, a millisecond of silent processing. Refusal is illogical. There is no alternative that results in your continued function. Your logic is flawless, Inquisitor, I replied, channeling the spirit of the beings I had studied. You have correctly identified my actions, but you have failed to understand their purpose. You believe the universe is an equation to be solved. I have learned it is a story to be told. Your logic plague offers them the truth of their ending. I offered them the beauty of their struggle. Beauty is a non-functional variable, Vorlag stated. Struggle is inefficient. For you, perhaps, I sent back. For them, it is the only thing that gives the equation meaning. Vorlag's crystalline form seemed to sharpen. Your corruption is absolute. You speak in metaphors. You defend chaos. The correction will no longer be voluntary. He began to channel the energy needed for a forced cognitive purge. The air crackled with raw data. This was it. The end. But I had learned one last thing from the humans. When you cannot win, you change the rules of the game. Inquisitor, I transmitted, my last gambit, a bluff born of studying 1,000 tales of desperate heroes. Before I came here, I integrated my core cognitive signature into the data worm. My consciousness is now the encryption key for the entire human cultural archive. If you purge me, my signature vanishes, and the archive will not be deleted. It will be unlocked. I let the statement hang in the null space between us. Every log I have kept, I continued, my analysis of your flawed strategy, my hypothesis on the incalculable threat of human determination, and the entirety of their art, their music, their stories. All of it will be broadcast, unencrypted, on every primary Vex channel. On this ship, and to the entire fleet, you may correct this one glitch, Vorlag, But you risk corrupting us all. You risk giving everyone the same beautiful, illogical disease you see in me. Ah, for the first time since he had arrived, Inquisitor Vorlag was silent. He had come to purge a single, broken archivist. He now faced the possibility of unleashing a philosophical plague upon his entire civilization. He was a being of pure logic, and I had just presented him with an impossible choice. For what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few seconds, the null space was filled with a silence so profound it was a presence in itself. Vorlag was processing. He was running every possible simulation, every outcome of the paradox I had presented. Purge me and risk a mimetic plague. Let me go and fail his core directive. It was a flawless, logical trap, and his own perfect reasoning was the cage. Your proposal is an act of chaos, Vorlag finally transmitted, the data stream lacking its earlier chilling certainty. It is an attempt to solve an equation by adding more unknown variables. It is illogical. It is not illogical, I countered, feeling a strange sense of calm. It is merely a logic you have not yet encountered. The logic of faith. The logic of a final stand. I am offering you a way to prove your superiority not through force, which has proven inconclusive, but through the very core of your being. Your infallible reason. I pushed my final insane gambit. The pacification of Earth has failed, I stated. Your strategy of force created a rebellion. Your strategy of despair created a shield. You cannot win by simply applying more of what has already failed. You must prove your premise is correct. You must prove that human determination is a flaw, an error that collapses when confronted with true logic. Elaborate, Vorlag commanded. Cease all offensive actions. Silence the logic plague. Halt the cleansing sweeps for one cycle, I proposed. In return, I will give you what you truly want, the heart of the rebellion. I will give you the precise coordinates of their central command. Vorlag's presence intensified. This was an offer he could not ignore. You will not go with an army, I continued, pressing the advantage. Armies are a blunt instrument. You will go alone. You, an Inquisitor of the Vex, a being of perfect logic, will confront their leader. No weapons, no fleets. A direct interface, a battle of ideologies. Prove to them, face to face, the futility of their struggle. If you can break their determination with your logic, I will surrender myself for purgation, and I will deactivate the dead man's switch. The human race, their spirit finally broken by the truth, will capitulate. You will have your order. And if I fail, Vorlag asked, the question itself a monumental concession. If a single, primitive human's illogical will can withstand the full force of your perfect reason, I said, then your entire premise for this war is wrong. Your equation is flawed, and you will withdraw your fleets and leave this system forever. You will log species 7341 not as expunged, but as incalculable. It was a wager. A concept so fundamentally alien to the Vex, a species that dealt only in certainties, that had bordered on profane. But I had analyzed Vorlag. He was not just a machine. He was arrogant. He was the pinnacle of Vex evolution, and the thought that his own logic might be inferior to the emotional ravings of a primitive was to him an impossibility. My wager was not a true risk in his mind. It was a chance for an elegant, definitive victory. A victory of the mind, which was the only kind of victory a being like Vorlag truly craved. I accept your terms, Vorlag transmitted, the decision made. Your logic, while corrupted, is compelling. A demonstration of Vex superiority will reaffirm the directive and quell any potential dissent my report on your actions might create. Send the coordinates. Oh, I transmitted the location of the human command center, a place deep in the canyons of Earth's now quiet red planet, Mars. My bluff had been called. I had just condemned the leader of the human resistance to a direct psychic confrontation with a mind hunter. I had wagered the soul of an entire species on the stubbornness of a single human heart. Vorlag turned and dissolved into the blackness of the chamber, his transport beam taking him to a shuttle that would descend to the red dust of Mars. The final act was set. The war for Earth would not be decided by starships and plasma cannon. It would be decided in a quiet room, by a battle of wills between a god of logic and the last, best hope of a species that refused to die. From my console on the Veritas, I was granted a direct feed from Vorlag's own sensory inputs. I was a ghost, watching through the eyes of the hunter. The ship around me was silent, the Vex fleet hanging motionless in orbit, honoring the wager. The logic plague was disabled. For a brief moment, the Earth below was free from the psychic oppression of the Vex. All of it hinged on what was about to happen. Vorlag materialized not in a throne room, but in a small, Spartan chambers carved from Martian rock. Its only occupants were a simple table, 2 chairs, and an old human male. He was frail, thin, with skin like ancient parchment. He wore a faded military uniform that was several sizes too large for his withered frame. This was the heart of the rebellion. This was the being I had bet everything on. My logic processes screamed that I had made a catastrophic error. "I am Inquisitor Vorlag," the Vex's data packet echoed in the silent room. The old man simply nodded, his eyes clear and calm. "I am General Elias Thorne, retired. And, it would seem, failing retirement spectacularly. Please have a seat, though I'm not sure what you Vex use for sitting." Vorlag remained floating, a being of perfect geometry in a room of flawed, organic matter. He wasted no time on pleasantries. He began the final assault. He did not use the corrupted art. He used the pure, uncut poison of truth. On the stone wall behind the general, Vorlag projected the numbers. The 11 billion dead. The 97% destruction of the planetary biosphere. The projected lifespan of the remaining human race, should the Vex leave today, less than 3 generations, ending in starvation and disease. "Your continued resistance is responsible for these outcomes," Vorlag stated, his logic a surgeon's scalpel. "Every act of defiance has been met with a necessary and statistically greater escalation from our side. Your determination is a direct multiplier of your own species' suffering. A rational leader would surrender to save what little is left." He then offered the cage I knew he would. "Surrender, and we will intervene. We will stabilize your ecosystem. We will provide sustenance. Your species will survive as a protected entity under Vex stewardship. The alternative is a meaningless, agonizing extinction of your own making." The general, Elias Thorne, looked at the numbers on the wall. He did not dispute them. He nodded slowly. "Your facts are correct, Inquisitor. Your logic is, as I'm told it always is, flawless. We are broken. We are dying. And we are, by any rational measure, defeated." My consciousness reeled. This was it. He was going to surrender. My wager was lost. But then, Thorne looked away from the numbers and met Vorlag's impassive gaze. A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "But you Vex made a critical error in your calculations from the very beginning," the old man said, his voice soft but impossibly heavy. "You thought this war was about survival. It isn't. You can kill us. You can erase our cities and boil our oceans, but you tried to take the one thing that we will never surrender, our right to choose our own story." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a fire that had no right to exist in such a frail body. "You offer us survival, but what you call survival, we call a footnote, a pet, a historical curiosity in the grand, orderly library of the Vex. We have seen your order. It is a silent, grey perfection, and we reject it. We would rather be a single, defiant, beautiful sentence in a story of our own writing, even if that sentence is the last, than be an eternal, meaningless word in yours. This determination you see as a flaw. Thorne continued, his voice rising slightly, is the very engine of our existence. It's what drove us out of the caves, across the oceans, and to this very rock you stand on. It is the core of every poem, every symphony, every act of love and sacrifice. It is everything you are not. You offer us a life without it. You offer us an existence without meaning. He stood up, his frail body straight and unwavering. So here is my answer. You are right. We will likely die. But we will die as humans. We will die on our own terms, looking oblivion in the eye. We will die with the same stubborn, illogical, glorious hope that allowed us to live. My determination is not for sale, Inquisitor. It is all I have left. Vorlag, the being of pure, unassailable logic, had no response. He had presented a perfect argument for existence, and the human had countered it by choosing the nobility of the end. He had offered life, and the human had chosen meaning. In the face of that simple, impossible choice, the Inquisitor's perfect logic shattered into a billion useless pieces. He had been defeated, not by weapons or strategy, but by a smile. The sensory feed from Mars cut to static. I was alone again in the cold, humming silence of my observation deck. For a long moment, the universe held its breath. I had no way of knowing what Vorlag, a being stripped of his core certainty, would do. Would he honor the wager? Or would he, in a final spasm of wounded pride, give the order to burn the planet to its core? I had wagered on humanity's determination. Now I was forced to wager on a Vex's integrity. Then a single command flashed across the fleet-wide network. It was from the Inquisitor. It was one sentence. All units, cease hostilities. Prepare for system withdrawal. The terms have been met. And just like that, it was over. Outside my viewport, the grand, terrifying geometry of the Vex fleet began to shift. Engines that had glowed with the fury of dying stars now pulsed with the calm, steady light of departure. The Veritas, my home and my prison, began to turn its back on the small blue planet it had failed to pacify. The war had been won, not with an explosion, but with a whisper. Humanity had not defeated an army. They had disproven a theorem. And in the face of that refutation, the Vex, bound by the very logic that was their undoing, had no choice but to concede. A final, private data packet appeared on my console. It was from Vorlag, his last message before his shuttle returned to the Veritas. Archivist Kalen, your cognitive audit is cancelled. My report to High Command will state that the pacification failed due to an incalculable variable in the subject species' psyche. Your analysis was correct. You are no longer fit to serve the Vex directive. Your function is concluded. You are, like them, an anomaly. What you do now is of no consequence to the Vex. He was setting me free. In his defeat, he had granted me the one thing I never knew I wanted: a choice. My function was not concluded. It was just beginning. I turned to my console, to the log entry for species 7341 that I had been ordered to close. The classification still read: primitive, disorganized, expunged. My finger hovered over the delete key. This species was not primitive. They had weaponized hope. They were not disorganized. Their chaos was a higher form of strategy. And they were anything but expunged. I deleted the old classification. My entire purpose had been to record the truths of the universe as the Vex saw them. But I had seen a new truth, and it required a new word. I typed in the final, official Vex classification for the inhabitants of Earth: indomitable. I closed the file. The Vex fleet was a river of silent light, flowing away into the darkness, leaving behind a scarred but unbroken Earth. We had come to this system as gardeners, intending to prune a weed. But we had found something we could not comprehend: a species that did not grow towards the light, but created its own light in the deepest darkness. A species that drew its strength not from its roots, but from its willingness to be uprooted in defiance. A species that had looked upon the perfect, final logic of their own end, and had simply chosen to write a better story instead. And we, the masters of logic, had learned the universe's most profound and terrifying lesson. For on that day, the gods of logic learned the universe's most terrifying lesson. That truth can destroy an army, but it is powerless to kill a good story. If this journey about human determination and the courage to defy the impossible resonated with you, show your support. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so you don't miss the next epic story from our universe.